Good morning. Welcome to our service this morning. It's so good that you are watching. We are thankful for everybody who is watching. We get words of encouragement and so forth as we talk with people on the phone. Some people text us and encourage us in that way. And it's just really it's an encouragement. It's an exhortation to keep this up and to keep striving, keep doing this, because it does make a connection with us as a church, and I think that's important. I think if you have opportunity, would you please tell other people about our online services that we have on Facebook. Tell them that they can watch it either at any time, because it's pre-recorded and it just gets loaded, so it'll be there for them to watch at any point. And also, we are posting the services are getting posted onto Macedonia Church's new YouTube channel. So go to YouTube, look for Macedonia United Brethren Church, and you'll find our YouTube channel. You can subscribe, become a subscriber, and tell others about it. Share it with them. Post the links onto your Facebook page, or email folks, or call them. Let them know that they can watch this. I think it'd be an encouragement to everyone. There's something I wanted to share with you. I don't know how this is going to work, but we're going to put it up here and give it a try. See if you can see that pretty well. This is a map of Israel. And if you look, we're in the northern part of Israel here. This is the Dead Sea down here. There's the Sea of Galilee right up there. Kind of hard to get this in here. And up here at the very top, this is a relief map that I have. Up here at the very top, right where my finger is, that little green spot there, that's a mountain, okay? If I turn this over this way and bring it in here, it's not green anymore, but that big white point right there, that's a mountain. That's Mount Hermon in the northernmost part of Israel, okay? Or Hermon, I think it's pronounced, Hermon. And right at the base of that mountain is a town called Caesarea Philippi, it was there in Jesus' day. Today, I believe it is called Panias, or perhaps Banias. I'm not sure which name they use there now. It's had all three names in its history. It's the place where Jesus takes his disciples. We're going to talk about it in the sermon a little bit later, towards the end of the sermon. It's from Matthew chapter 16. It's where Jesus takes his disciples to a pagan worship center up in the northern part of Israel, where the pagans worship the god Pan, Caesar. They worship Caesar there. They worship Zeus. There's temples there. He takes his disciples there and he asks them this question: who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And it provides a really good conversation for them there. Just wanted to show you the map so you'd get an idea of where we're going to be on in the sermon today as we get down towards the last part of the sermon in Caesarea Philippi. So be listening for that and think about that high mountain, Mount Hermon, right there by Caesarea Philippi. Now, Tina is going to share some music for you. Really appreciate what Tina's been doing to put this music together. She does such a fine job. She's going to sing and lead you in singing the hymn, Blessed Assurance.
Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste and glory divine. There is salvation, purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior. Praising my Savior all the day long. visions of rapture now burst on my sight. Angels descending, bring from above echoes of mercy, whispers of love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect salvation, all is at rest. I am my Savior, am happy at last. Watching and waiting, looking above, filled with His goodness, lost in His love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Praising my Savior all the day long.
In these days of confused situations, in these nights of a restless remorse, when the heart and the soul of a nation lay wounded and cold as a corpse, from the grave of the innocent comes a song bringing joy to the sad. Oh, your cry has been heard and the ransom has been paid up in full. Be ye glad. Oh, be ye glad. Oh, be ye glad. Every debt that you ever had been paid up in full by the grace of the Lord. Be ye glad, be ye glad, be ye glad. Now from your dungeon a rumor is stirring. You have heard it again and again. But this time the cell keys are turning, and outside there are faces of friends. And though your body lay weary from wasting, and your eyes show the sorrow they've had, oh, the love that your heart is now tasting has opened the gates. Be ye glad. Oh, be ye glad. Oh, be ye glad. Every debt that you ever had has been paid up in full by the grace of the Lord. Be ye glad, be ye glad, be ye glad. be like lights on the rim of the water, bringing hope in a storm sea of night. Be a refuge amidst the slaughter of these fugitives in their flight. For you are timeless and part of a puzzle. You are winsome and young as a lad, and there is no disease or no struggle that can pull you from God. Be ye glad, oh be ye glad, oh be ye glad. Every debt that you ever had has been paid up in full by the grace of the Lord. Be ye glad, be ye glad, be ye glad. Oh, be ye glad, oh, be ye glad. Every debt that you ever had has been paid up in full by the grace of the Lord. Be ye glad, be ye glad, be ye glad.
Last Monday morning, I was in my Trailblazer on the way to Dollar General to get some essential items. All of our shopping at present is essential, right? It's been defined by that word, essential. And I was listening to a podcast, and the young man who was being interviewed said something that caught my ear. Speaking about us human beings in general, he commented, I don't believe that we are from here, from this world. I think we're from another world. Now that's a strange comment, to be sure, but keep that thought in mind for a moment. In the Easter sermon last Sunday, I used this quote from C.S. Lewis' book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You might remember the White Witch, who was in control of another world called Narnia, had put to death the hero of the story, the lion by the name of Aslan. But Aslan, in possession of much more power than the White Witch, returned from the dead. And in speaking of this to two of the children in the story, Aslan remarked that death started working backward. Death started working backward. That sentence captures the essence of the resurrection of Jesus. In Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, death worked backward, and the curse of sin began to be reversed. That was the Father's plan. That was the Father's will, to reverse the curse of sin, and he accomplished this in the death of his Son Jesus as a sacrifice for the sin of this world, followed by Jesus' resurrection from the dead. Now, what exactly would be God's purpose in reversing this curse? Well, redemption. Redemption of his creation and restoration of things to their original state. In other words, a return to the world as God had originally intended this world to be. A regaining of that former world, which has now been lost. Now, in that podcast interview I mentioned, what was it that that young man had said? He had said that he believed that we humans aren't from this world and that we're from another world. Now, I'm not entirely sure what he meant by that, and I'm not going to speculate on that this morning, but I would totally agree with him in this sense. It certainly seems to me like we don't really belong here, not in this world, not in the way that it presently is. Things in this world certainly don't seem to be the way they should be. And that's more than just a shallow, superficial observation. It seems to be a deep-rooted feeling, a strong desire is there, an intense longing for another place, another land, another country. As though we instinctively know things could be better, that things have been better. It's almost a nostalgia, feelings about a place that we've been but have long ago forgotten. And then a scent in the air, perhaps, or a look around at the surrounding landscape, and it stirs within us what almost seems like a memory of a happier time and place. And yet we can't really attach that feeling to any place in our living memory. It makes me wonder, can we really have remnants of a memory of some place that's outside of our experience? A place that feels more like home than any place that we've ever been. Maybe some of you are familiar with the chorus.
This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore.
A longing for going home to a place that I've never been before. C.S. Lewis often wrote about this longing. He saw it as evidence for the truth of the Christian faith. In a sermon entitled "The Weight of Glory," he connected this longing to heaven. Now, if we are made for heaven, the desire for our proper place will be already in us, but not yet attached to the true object, meaning heaven, and will even appear as the rival of that object. If a trans-temporal, trans-finite good, and by that he means a beyond time or beyond the finite kind of good, if that is our real destiny, then any other good on which our desire fixes must be in some degree fallacious or false, must bear at best only a symbolical relation to what will truly satisfy. A symbolical relation to what will truly satisfy. We talk about some of our better experiences in life, like that dream vacation, as being like heaven on earth, right? Or almost like paradise. One time, Debbie and I went to Ortana. We wanted to take a train ride on that old steam engine that they used to run. Maybe some of you have done that. Little did we know that on that particular day that we went, there was this gathering at Ortana of all these train lovers from all over the place. I don't know where they all came from, but there were a lot of people. For these people, old steam engines carried them back to a lost era in American history, when trains moved people and transported goods everywhere. They were the lifeblood of the country in that day. And these folks longed for a return to that lost world. Now, there were 3 old steam engines there on display that day, and at a certain time of day, right after lunchtime, as I recall, all 3 of those engines were going to blast their whistles, each one in succession, one at a time. Each had their own time that they were going to do it. So we gathered with the whole crowd to wait for these whistles to blow. We could sense the excitement around us for these steam engine enthusiasts. I mean, this was a really big deal for them. And while we stood there waiting, a man behind us said to no one in particular, "This must be what heaven's going to be like." Now, up until that moment,
I had never even thought about steam engines being in heaven. But for that man, and probably for others around us, steam engines and these folks' deep yearning and longing to be around them symbolize that which one day will truly and ultimately satisfy. For them, it was a taste of heaven on earth. The night before he was crucified, Jesus gave his disciples a promise that stirs in the hearts this deep desire for another place.
John 14, 1-3 says, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also."
This promise of Jesus applies to anyone who has trusted Christ. He's preparing a place for us. And notice that his purpose for doing so is so that we can be together with him. Where I am, there you may be also. The grand reality is that true satisfaction for this longing we have, it's found only in Jesus. The longing will not be fulfilled in a new location or at a different time than the present, whether it's past time or some future time for which we hope. I see these posts on Facebook these days with a picture of some dream house. Maybe you've seen them. A completely tricked out log cabin is one that I'm always attracted to. It's out in the middle of the forested wilderness, and there's a mountain stream running by it, and it has a huge deck and this cathedral ceiling, and it's out in the middle of nowhere. It looks so serene. And the caption says something like this: if you give up TV and the internet for 1 year and live in this house, you can own it. Would you do it? Now, of course, it's not a real offer, right? Everybody knows that. But lots of people will agree to those conditions. Sure, man, I'd do that in a minute, right? And because they don't really have to think about it, because it's not a real offer, no one really thinks about how they're going to have to get food out there in the middle of nowhere, or how they're going to have to heat the place in the winter, or what they're going to do about all the snow that piles all the way up to that deck, and then what they'll do in the spring, and when the thaws and all of that stream is filled to overflowing on its banks and just floods the whole area. No one who is captivated about the possible realization of a long-held dream ever really thinks about all of the problems that this potential paradise on earth probably has. No one ever weighs the consequences of the 3 wishes granted by the genie in the bottle, right? Only Jesus quenches the thirst of a person's soul. Not any dream house, not any place or any object or any circumstance, not even any other person. Only Jesus can satisfy that longing of the soul, that deep desire to recover what was lost, to return to the way things were meant to be. Before the shutdown, at Macedonia Church, I began taking our people through a series of 10 C words that describe God's plan for the ages. What has God set out to do in human history? What has been and is on his agenda for us human beings? How is God running his household?
We began with creation, when God made everything that there is. He originally established all things the way they were truly meant to be. But then the corruption came. Both angelic and human beings rebelled against the Creator, and that rebellion impacted the entirety of the created order. Disorder, disease, destruction, decay, and death overtook the creation. Several generations later, catastrophe overwhelmed the planet as God sent the judgment of the flood, making known to humanity that He is a holy God. There are standards. He has a right to make a judgment call. Following the flood, the Lord brought confusion of language upon the human race, creating the various nations of the world. And then through 2 unconditional covenants, the Lord called out a people from the nations of the world that they might be a nation unto Him. And He promised that it would endure forever under the house of David through the Messiah. The Anointed One would one day reign from David's throne in Jerusalem over all the nations of the world. This was all part of God's plan for the ages. We then talked about this Messiah, the Christ who would come. It was prophesied that He would reign. However, it was also prophesied that He would suffer. The first time the Christ, the Messiah, came, He suffered on the cross. It was at the cross that Christ took upon Himself the sins of the world. God's plan to redeem and to restore all things unto Himself. And when Christ rose from the dead, death began working backward, and that curse of sin began to be reversed. And everything that we've just covered has become the message and the mission of the church. The church is the part of God's plan that is active in our time. The church has been commissioned by Christ to take the good news of God's plan to redeem the world to all the nations of the world. Friend, Jesus has come to meet this longing that we're talking about, this desire of your heart, that thirst that nothing else or no one else will ever be able to quench. That longing you have for a place of belonging, a place more like home than anywhere you've ever been, that place with Jesus. One day soon, Jesus Christ will return to take up His crown. When Jesus takes the throne of David in Jerusalem, things on earth will radically change. Ultimately, the result of His reign will lead to the consummation of all things. God's plan for the ages will be completed, and Christ is at the center of all this. And for those who've trusted in Christ, that deep longing will be no more. The children of God will finally be home. Oh, what a day that will be.
Of course, the tendency of the human heart is to look for another plan of deliverance. I mean, there must be something else. There must be some other way rather than God's plan, rather than the gospel of Jesus Christ. Like the Tower of Babel, God had commanded the people there to scatter over the whole earth, and humanity said, no. We think what we're going to do is build a city and a tower, and we're going to stay in one place where we can make a name for ourselves as opposed to glorifying and magnifying your name, God. You see, there's got to be a better way than that. I'm reminded of something I'd heard that the Beatle John Lennon had said many, many years ago.
Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right, and I'll be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Jesus was all right, but His disciples were thick and ordinary. It's them twisting it that ruins it for me.
Understand, I'm not attacking the person of John Lennon. I want to critically examine his ideas here, though. Lennon basically says that where Jesus made his mistake was in choosing thick and ordinary men as his disciples. Lenin says that they twisted what Jesus had said and ruined it for him. That's odd to me, folks, because if it weren't for those same thick and ordinary fellas later writing down what Jesus had said, well, then John Lennon would have had no idea whether Jesus was all right, like he said. You see, Jesus entrusted his message, his witness, and his ministry to his disciples that he had chosen. And they recorded what he said and what he did. If they hadn't done that, none of us would ever have even known there was a person called Jesus of Nazareth, let alone known what he did and what he said and what he taught. Outside of the New Testament writings, there really are no other contemporary detailed sources on Jesus' life, his words, and his ministry. It's rather difficult to accuse Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John of twisting what Jesus said when you're depending upon Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to tell you truthfully what Jesus said. I mean, which is it then? Twisted, or is it truth? You can't have both. Now, this really becomes significant because later in his life, John Lennon would write a song called Imagine. And that song says, in part,
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to live or die for. And no religion, too. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one.
Now, at the time of Babel, God established the nations, and he set the boundaries and the borders of those countries. In our day, there has been a consistent effort to try and to unite all nations under one global flag and one global government. If countries could just be eliminated, get rid of those sovereign nations, and no religion either. Of course, Lenin would definitely include Christianity in that. In this song, folks, John Lennon is describing his creed, what he believes, his belief system. And interestingly enough, John Lennon wants to convert us to his ideas. He says so. He hopes that someday we will join him and his fellow believers. Because that when we do, the whole world will be united. See, this is his religion. But I thought he wanted no religion. If we just believe like he does, there will be peace. Another way of saying this is we can have all of the peace in the world if we all do what John Lennon wants us to do. It's kind of like loving steam engines. If everybody in the world started to love steam engines like that guy at Ortana, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if everyone was like him, well, it wouldn't be long before steam engines really would come back again because everybody would want it. Again, I am not attacking the person, okay? I'm simply highlighting for you the fallacy of his thinking here. It's very idealistic thinking. But the reality behind it is that there will always be someone calling the shots. Someone will always be manning the controls. Someone will always be building and driving those steam engines, okay? And yet, many still hold forth the ideals captured in this song as being doable. Just last month, a video released on YouTube with 25 celebrities singing the different phrases of the song Imagine. Each person recorded their part of the song while in isolation in their home because of the coronavirus. Now, let me say, I totally get the sentiment in this song. I know why it is so appealing. Because it speaks directly to that longing for something other than what we presently have in this world. There's that recognition in it that things are not right in this world. We can all imagine something better because we all long for something better. But try as we might, no one in this world seems capable of getting us there. And friends, this is why we need to listen to Jesus and what he says, because he's not from this world, because he is the only one who can restore humanity to that world in which we were meant to live.
John 16:33 says, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." This world and all its systems of belief and its ideologies and philosophies and all its sciences will fall short and will fail us. But take heart, friends. Jesus has overcome this broken, ineffective, sin-filled world system. We can only have peace in Christ. Our C word for this morning, in case you were wondering, is the church. During Jesus' earthly ministry, he took his disciples to a unique and unusual place called Caesarea Philippi, where he laid the groundwork for his church. To wrap up our lesson this morning, let's look into this account. First, let's take a look at the setting. Caesarea Philippi was in the northern part of Israel, and the city used to be called Panias. It was named for the Greek god Pan. Pan was half human and half goat. He often acted solely upon his own emotions, his feelings, impulsively. If you've ever panicked, well, panic is a word derived from Pan, as is the word pandemonium. Hey, and even pandemic. At Caesarea Philippi, there were shrines built into the rocky cliffs there to honor and to worship Pan. There was an altar there where people would sacrifice goats to Pan. Also at Caesarea Philippi, there was a temple to worship Zeus, the king of the Greek gods. And there was a temple for worshiping Augustus Caesar. This was a town dedicated to pagan ritual worship, a place to worship false gods, and even to revere and to worship men like Caesar. There was even a large cavern entrance in the face of the cliff there that supposedly was a gateway to the place of the dead, Hades. This is the kind of place where Jesus took his disciples. Jewish men who felt more at home, very much more at home, in Jerusalem at the temple. I'm sure they were a little unnerved just being there. But Jesus has brought them to this place of other gods to talk about himself. Matthew 16, verse 13 says, "When Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, 'Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?'" Jesus takes his disciples to this place for worshiping all these pagan deities. You get the feeling that he places himself amid all of the pagan gods of the Gentiles in order to set himself apart from all the rest. And to make that even clearer, Jesus then asks his disciples, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And he said to them, But who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered and said, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. The disciples tell Jesus what they've heard from others about who he might be. John the Baptist, Elijah the prophet, Jeremiah come back from the dead, or one of the other prophets. And then Jesus asks them, Who do you say that I am? And Peter says, You are the Christ. You're the Messiah. You're the anointed one who has been prophesied to come to Israel and redeem us. You are the Son of the living God. You know, one gets the impression that Peter here senses the longing in his heart has been finally fulfilled. You're the one, Jesus. You're the only one, Jesus. Things are going to be made right again because you are here. The Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered and said to him, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Jesus tells Peter that he didn't get this information from anyone living here in this world. No. The answer to the identity of Jesus came from the Father, who's in heaven. At a later time and place, Jesus would tell the Roman governor Pilate, My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is from another place. The home place. The place we've never been, yet we long to see it again, as though we know it. As though we remember it. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Jesus is making something of a pun here using Peter's name. Peter's name means a small stone, like something you would hold in your hand. Peter, you're like a little rock. But what you just said, well, that's like a huge rock. And on that huge rock, Peter, on me, I'm going to build my church. I'm going to place it right on me. And there's that large cavern in the rocky cliff behind us, Peter. Supposedly it leads to the underworld, the place of the dead. The pagans here, they call it the gates of Hades. I'm going to build my church on myself, Peter. And the gates of Hades will not be able to overcome it. Not be able to prevail against it or to defeat it. God's plan, friends, is to redeem and to restore his creation back to the way it was meant to be. This is what God has set out to accomplish. And as we've said numerous times in this series, what God sets out to accomplish, he will accomplish. And so the Father sent the Son to be the Savior of this world. Jesus, God in the flesh, he came here. He died on the cross here to deal with the sin that unleashed the curse of corruption upon this world. And then he rose again to new life, conquering the curse of death. And then Jesus entrusted to his church that he built on himself. He entrusted us with his message about what he'd done to restore the world that was lost. He put us, his church, on mission to tell others about him and what he did on the cross to restore lost souls back into relationship to himself. This is the church's role to play in God's plan for the ages of human history. This is what we're meant to do, to tell the story of Jesus. If this coronavirus pandemic and all the pandemonium and all the panic surrounding it has taught us anything, It's reinforced for us our deepest sense that things are just not right in this world. And left to ourselves, we'll not be able to discern the whole truth about what's wrong. But we know that something is definitely wrong. And that knowledge serves to reinforce our deep longing to have what is right restored to us once again. So, this morning, as one voice among many, many others in the Church of Christ, based on the truth of God's Word given to me in His Bible, based on the direction of His Holy Spirit, and based upon the reality of the person of Christ Himself, who has loved you and has acted on your behalf to redeem you and to restore you, I testify to you today that Christ alone is the one who can satisfy your longing for that which is right. In the desert wilderness of uncertainty, Jesus quenches your thirst with His truth. In the anguish of despair, Jesus brings you hope. In the chaos around you, Jesus offers you peace. And in the presence of death itself, Jesus gives you life. Choose Jesus, friend. Choose Jesus today.
Above all powers, above all kings, above all nations and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man. You were here before the world began. Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth, there's no way to measure what you're worth. Crucified, laid behind the stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose, trampled on the ground. You took the fall. Not me, above all powers, above all kings, above all nations, all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man. You were here before the world began. Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth, there's no way to measure what you're worth. Crucified, laid behind the stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose, trampled on the ground. You took the fall. God in me, salvation.